So let's look at section 11.1. But first, let's go back and look at our objectives. We're going to outline the classification of and evolution of prokaryotes or bacteria. We're going to look at their structure, we're going to look at their metabolism, their range, and also we're going to explore the relationships between bacteria and human. There are three domains of life on our planet. There are bacteria, which are here in blue. There's eukarya, which we're part of, the animal section down here, but that's where we also find plants and fungi, slime mold, and these are all cells that have a nucleus in them. Bacteria do not. And then we have a domain called Archaea, and Archaea was only recently discovered, and it sort of falls between the two of these domains. We'll see that in a chart upcoming. Take a look at this chart at the bottom. So we look at the characteristic, the flagella. That's the appendage that kind of beats and transports many cells. The cell membrane, protein synthesis, introns, and peptoglycan. So look at our three columns here, bacteria, archaea, and eukarya. And you'll notice that archaea has some unique characteristics. You should read through this. You should also read on prokaryotic evolution. Prokaryotic evolution, bacterial evolution, some of the oldest living organisms on our planet. The oldest microfossils we have are of prokaryotes. Domain bacteria are the most diverse and abundant organisms on Earth. They live in almost all the environments. Any surface that has not been sterilized is likely to have bacteria. Bacteria called cyanobacteria are important. They're bluish green in color because they contain chlorophyll, and these were one of the first organisms to make food through photosynthesis and release oxygen into the atmosphere. Remember, we looked at that chart a little while ago. Here's a picture of cyanobacteria bloom in the middle of a lake. That's what these green waves are. These are all mountains around this particular lake. And one of the reasons why bacteria bloom like this is because extra nutrients from agriculture get into that lake. Archaea is still a relatively little known domain of life. And I'd like you to read about this here. They were discovered in extreme environments. And for that reason, scientists call them extremophiles or lovers of extreme. And they're described as some of the oldest organisms on the planet. They're known to live just about everywhere, and they live inside of us too, and they take part in many of the processes that we go through, especially in our digestive tract. But not a lot is known. That's a huge area of research right now in biology, is the domain Archaea. Okay, let's get back to bacteria. So bacteria are very, very tiny. So in this shot, these are all bacteria, these rod-shaped, and these red bacteria are here. And because they're so small, scientists are always looking for a way to identify them correctly. So bacteria have the regular plasma membrane, cell membrane, that's in green here, but they also have an outer cell wall. In this case, it's made of peptoglycan. Now, this outer membrane down here is made of it's a polysaccharide and protein different. So we use a stain called Gram stain. And if it stains the bacteria a deep purple, that means this absorbed it. That's one way that we can tell if they're called gram-positive bacteria. If they don't stain that, it's called a gram-negative. And that's one of the ways that we can distinguish, because of that thick wall that takes in that purple stain. Let's take a look at kind of the typical shapes of bacteria, the typical shapes of the prokaryotic cells. You have rod shapes like this, you have spherical shapes, but then you also have helix shapes. So each of these, that's an individual cell, that's an individual cell, that's an individual cell. And here is an artist version. The main parts of the prokaryotic cell are listed here. So you should go over this and know that they have a thick cell wall. They also have a cell membrane, plasma membrane. This is their DNA, and these little dots are the ribosomes. And this is how they get around. This particular one, species only has one flagella on the back, but this is how they transport themselves. Another way to show the DNA in there, we have in the prokaryotic cell, we have nucleoid, which is chromosomal DNA. This is circular, double-stranded pieces of DNA, not surrounded by a nuclear membrane. Remember, prokaryotic cells, bacteria, don't have a nucleus. They also have these independent DNA molecules, which kind of float and are little circles of DNA, and these are called plasmid. They're independent, they're double-stranded, and they can be easily transmitted from one type of bacteria to the other. Remember, no nucleus in them. Here's also the variations they have in the flagella of bacteria. Some bacteria motor around with just one, some have several, some have one on one side, one on the other, or some have them all over the place. And if we look at the bottom there in table 11.2, metabolism of bacteria or prokaryotes, most of them are photoautotrophs, but some can also be chemoautotrophs. Remember, scientists in the 1970s discovered that ecosystem of chemosynthetic bacteria that are at the bottom of the ocean. Bacteria in humans. Some bacteria are great for us, some don't harm us at all, and sometimes they cause disease. There's a wonderful book called I Contain Multitudes by Ed Young, which talks about that. So bacteria and humans, they have important relationships. Bacteria make our lives easier in lots of ways. They provide vital ecosystem services, and they are important decomposers. They are also needed for carbon and nitrogen cycles. There are billions of bacteria inside us in our digestive food. They help make vitamins. And if you take a look at this list, these are some of the ways that bacteria benefit us. They create products, they make drugs, biogas such as methane, killing plant pesticides. They just are very, very helpful. However, bacteria also can cause some disease. Two of the most prevalent that we have around now are tularemia, which is right here. That's a bacterial. And we also have Lyme disease, which is caused by a bacteria. So yes, some bacteria can cause disease, not all of them. And I just wanted to mention that Louis Pasteur, who was one of the founders of germ theory, it took him years to convince people. He was working in the 1880s, the 1890s. He was a French microbiologist, a French biologist, and it took him years to convince that something so small like a bacteria could actually cause a disease. So let's just summarize in 11.1 what we were discussing. So prokaryotes include bacteria and archaea, but remember, we know much more about bacteria than we do archaea. You should know a little bit about the archaea and read through that. Individual prokaryotes consist of a single cell without a nucleus. Most bacteria are much smaller than eukaryotic cells, and they have a cell wall. That's where we talked about gram staining. They fulfill their carbon and energy needs in various ways. They may be autotrophs, chemotrophs, phototrophs, photoheterotrophs. Aerobic prokaryotes live in habitats with oxygen, anaerobic without oxygen. Prokaryote cells grow to a certain size, then they divide by binary fission. We had talked about that earlier. This is a type of asexual reproduction. So make sure you read through that and understand that. Bacteria and humans have many important relationships. Bacteria provide human with a number of services, and they also cause some human disease. So remember, please read over section 11.1 carefully. Take notes on it. We're talking about the three domains of life. Three domains are prokaryote, archaea, and eukarya. In this particular chapter, we just looked at prokarya, or bacteria, and archaea. Good luck, and we'll move on to our next section.